Welcome back. We are going to talk about forensic investigations, and we'll cover a little bit about DNA stuff here. So, although crime scenes typically offer a wealth of evidence, some of it is incomprehensible to a patrol officer or a detective without some sort of assistance. And with that aid, law enforcement officers rely on forensic experts, which forensics is the practice of using science and technology to investigate crimes. And forensic experts apply their knowledge to items found at the crime scene to determine the following crucial facts. Now, you can see on the screen what those crucial facts are. And to assist forensic experts, many police departments are affiliated with crime laboratories or a crime scene unit. So that leads us to crime scene forensics. So the first law enforcement agent to reach a crime scene has the important task of protecting trace evidence. And trace evidence is small evidence, very small evidence, that is often invisible to the naked human eye, and it requires technological aid for detection. So this is going to be hairs, fibers, blood, fingerprints, maybe broken glass or footprints. Those are all examples of trace evidence. Police will also search a crime scene for bullets and spent cartridge casings, and these items provide clues as to, how far a shooter was from a target, or information that's stored in firearm databases. So the study of firearms and its application in solving crimes is under the term ballistics. And you can see that on your screen. So then, of course, we talk about fingerprint reliability. So for more than a century, the most important piece of trace evidence has been the human fingerprint. Forensic scientists compare a fingerprint lifted from a crime scene with that of a suspect and declare a match if there are between 8 and 16 points of similarity. So let's talk about DNA. Let's get a little more specific into DNA. So the technique of DNA fingerprinting, or using a suspect's DNA to match the suspect to a crime, emerged in the mid-1990s, and it's really replaced fingerprint evidence in many types of criminal investigations. So DNA, which is the same in each cell of a person's body, provides a genetic blueprint or a code for every living organism. And DNA fingerprinting is useful in criminal investigations because no two people, save for identical twins, have the same genetic code. So lab technicians can compare the DNA sample of a suspect with the evidence that's found at a crime scene. DNA fingerprinting process begins when a crime scene technician gathers blood, semen, skin, saliva, or hair from the scene of a crime. Blood cells and sperm are rich in DNA, making them particularly useful in murder and rape cases. DNA has also been extracted from sweat on dirty laundry, skin cells on eyeglasses, and saliva on used envelope seals. So once a suspect is identified, her or his DNA can be used to determine whether she or he can be placed at that crime scene. So the ability to find genetic information, as well as the longevity and accuracy of that, greatly increases the chance that a crime will be solved. So DNA is really important when we're talking about cold cases, because maybe at a time when DNA wasn't used, we now can go back and look for DNA samples on pieces of clothing or do some comparison analysis for the DNA. And that can bring about changes in what a cold case is doing at the time. So changing focus a little bit, we're going to go back to some different patrol strategies. So we talked a little bit about what patrol was, but now We've talked about forensics and DNA and crime scene units, but let's talk about some strategies that are used for patrol. Because remember, we're talking about policing and how police are doing their job. So all police departments are practicing incident-driven policing, in which they get a call for a service and the officer responds. About a third of the time, officers should be taking about a third of a patrol officer's time should be taken with answering calls for service. But really, in all reality, it's probably higher than that. So during a typical 8-hour shift, a Philadelphia patrol officer will answer 80 911 calls for service. 80 in 8 hours. That's a lot. So 911 technology is huge. And if you guys have never had an opportunity to go to tour or be part of a tour of some sort of a dispatch center, it's really interesting. And before I was a police officer, I dispatched for a few years, and it's certainly good to have that experience on the other side of the radio when you become a police officer. Nearly all police departments are using CAD systems, which is computer-aided dispatch systems. And they use this to manage incident response. So CADs also verify callers' addresses and phone numbers and determine, where's the closest patrol unit to that site. In many jurisdictions, the details, including any previous 911 calls from that location, are sent to an MDT, which is a mobile data terminal that's in a police officer's car. About 70% of 911 calls are made with wireless phones and can often be tracked using some sort of existing technology. So we have directed patrol and random patrol. So directed patrol, well, let's talk about random patrol first. There we go. Random patrol is making the rounds of a specific area with a general goal of detecting and preventing crime. So every police department in the United States randomly patrols its jurisdiction using automobiles. And you just randomly drive. I can vouch for that. Lots of miles put on a car. Randomly drive around the area. You're just making your presence known and watching. And in contrast to this, we have directed patrols, and those are targets of specific areas of a city. And they might be looking at a specific type of crime. So for instance, in my department, we went through kind of a hit with burglaries during the day. And so we had a burglary team that came on at certain times of the day in certain neighborhoods where the burglaries were pretty high. And they're directed to be there rather than being a random patrol to really look at what's going on in that area. So to get this information, there's often targeted areas, and we call them hotspots. And in these hotspots, there's greater number of criminals and then higher than average levels of victimization. So on one level, focusing on hotspots seems relatively straightforward, right? And on another level, to be effective, they really have to be pretty sophisticated. So oftentimes they're using different algorithms and crime mapping to locate these hotspots and essentially cool them down. So we have something I want to talk a little bit about, actually going back to strategies, is the rise of this idea of CompStat. I think I mentioned this before, but CompStat is what I wrote my final project for my master's thesis on, was on CompStat. And computerized stands for computerized crime mapping. And it was popularized when New York Police Department launched CompStat in the mid-1990s. It is still in use, and it starts with police officers reporting the exact location of crime and other crime-related information to their department. And they're fed into a computer, and then there's like this grid of these neighborhoods, and it's showing exactly where these crimes are happening. And by using these mapping systems, it helps to target those areas with specific strategies. So different arrest strategies exist. Like patrol strategies, arrest strategies can be divided into two categories. We have reactive and proactive. So reactive arrests are made by police officers usually who are on just general patrol and they observe a criminal act or they respond to a call for service. Now, proactive is when the police take the initiative to target a particular type of crime or behavior. So, in that burglary incidents where we had special team out there on burglary patrol in a certain neighborhood, if they catch a guy burglarizing a house in the middle of the day, that's proactive. They're out taking some initiative to target this area or this type of behavior. And the popularity of proactive theories was solidified by a magazine article that James Q. Wilson and George Kelly wrote in 1982. And in their piece, it was entitled Broken Windows. I have the book. It's a great book, actually. And they argued that reform era policing strategies focused on violent crime to the detriment of the vital police role of promoting the quality of life in neighborhoods. So the broken windows theory recommends maintaining order in these neighborhoods by cracking down on quality of life crimes, such as loitering, public drinking and urinating, panhandling, graffiti. And that was a big push to what brought about this idea of community policing. And a majority of departments rely on a broad spectrum strategy known as community policing. And this is defined as an approach that promotes community police partnerships. So my last position at North Charleston before I went to the coroner's office was as a community policing officer. They were called NROs, neighborhood resource officers. And we were in the top, there was 8 of us, and we were in the 8 highest crime neighborhoods in our jurisdiction. And we were each assigned one neighborhood, and we did everything in that neighborhood. We did investigations, we did patrol, we did community policing, going to meetings. I brought my kids and we planted plants at the neighborhood park. So it is definitely a great program. It's like neighborhood watch almost. You knew who was supposed to be in that neighborhood and who was not supposed to be in that neighborhood. And so you kind of improvised and you did the best that you could. This is a great program, definitely. So then, of course, similar to community policing, we have problem-oriented policing. And this is a strategy that's based on the premise that police departments devote too many of their resources to reacting to calls for service and too few on acting on their own initiatives. And so to rectify the situation, problem-oriented policing moves beyond simply responding to incidents and attempts, and instead to control or even solve the root causes of the criminal behavior. So problem-oriented policing encourages police officers to stop really looking at their work as day-to-day and rather to just shift looking at the patterns of criminal behavior in a positive direction to make some changes. So what are the challenges of becoming a police officer? I think we'll stop there and take a break. We'll be back.